The Abyss of Normandy. The true story of Pointe du Hoc, the weight of responsibility in the early hours of June 6, 1944. The English Channel was a chaos of iron and salt water. But while thousands of eyes were fixed on the sands of the landing beaches, one man carried a weight that few could endure. Colonel James Rudder knew that the success of the entire Operation Overlord depended on a single piece of limestone, Pointe du Hoc. Allied intelligence was clear. Atop that cliff, the Germans had installed the most dangerous artillery battery in Europe. 6 155mm cannons with a range of 25 kilometers. They could strike both Omaha and Utah beaches. If those guns fired, the invasion would die in the surf. The Allies didn't send ordinary infantry to this location. They sent the Rangers, men trained to do what was considered impossible. Chaos before the climb. The plan was a masterpiece on paper, but a disaster in execution. As the landing craft's LCA letters approached the shore, the sea became the first enemy. 6-foot waves battered the metal vessels. 10 men were lost before they even saw the coast, swallowed by the freezing waters under the weight of their gear. Then came a fatal error. Amidst the mist and the smoke of the bombardments, the navigation guide became confused. He mistook Pointe de la Percée for Pointe du Hoc. By the time Rudder realized the mistake, they were miles away from their target. They had to navigate parallel to the coast, exposed to every German battery, losing 40 crucial minutes. This delay meant that the naval support bombardment had stopped. When the Rangers finally hit the small strip of shingle at the base of the cliff, the element of surprise was dead. The Germans were at the top, looking down, waiting for them. The struggle against gravity and steel, what happened in the following minutes, defies military logic. The Rangers fired iron grapnels attached to ropes using mortars. But the ropes, soaked by seawater, were too heavy. Many fell back down. Some barely reached the top. Imagine the scene. You are on a strip of land only 10 yards wide. Behind you, the crashing sea. Above you, 100 feet of vertical rock. And from above, the Germans begin to hurl potato masher grenades and cut the ropes with knives. The Rangers had nowhere to run. The only direction was up. Some men began to climb using only their combat knives, stabbing them into the cracks of the rock. Others used the London fire ladders they had brought, but the ladders were covered in mud and blood. The sound was deafening, the chatter of German MG-42s above and the massive guns of the destroyer USS Satterley, which moved so close to the shore it nearly ran aground to provide cover for the men. Every meter gained was paid for with sweat and the absolute fear that the rope would be cut at any second. The desert of craters and the great shock. When the first Rangers finally breached the lip of the cliff, what they found was not an organized military base. The Allied naval bombardment had turned the top of Pointe du Hoc into a lunar landscape. 5-meter-deep craters covered everything. The dust shook their lungs. They rushed the concrete casemates, hearts pounding in their throats, ready to face the cannons that haunted General Eisenhower's dreams. But as they kicked down the doors of the fortifications, the silence was terrifying. The casemates were empty. There were no cannons, no ammunition. Only wooden beams painted to look like guns from a distance. For the men who had just watched their friends die during the climb, this was the darkest moment. Had they scaled hell for nothing? Doubt and anger spread through the craters. But Colonel Rudder did not falter. He knew those guns had to be somewhere. The silent patrol in the orchard while the main battle still raged near the concrete ruins, Sergeant Leonard Lomel and Sergeant Jack Kuhn decided to follow a trail in the mud. They were heavy tire marks leading away from the cliff toward an apple orchard. They moved with caution, slipping between the trees. And then they saw them, hidden in a swale, covered by nets and brush, were the 6 155mm guns. They were ready, loaded, and aimed directly at Utah Beach. The Germans had moved them during the night to protect them from the air raids. Without reinforcements and without a radio to call for orders, Lommel acted. He didn't use loud explosives. He used thermite grenades, silently placing them in the gun's traversing mechanisms. The intense heat melted the metal, welding the gears and rendering the weapons useless. In a matter of minutes, 2 men had won the battle that could have decided the war. The agonizing siege, what many documentaries forget, is what happened next. The destruction of the guns was only the beginning. The Rangers were now isolated. They were little more than 200 men, and that number was dropping by the hour, trapped on a piece of land surrounded on 3 sides by the German army. For the next 48 hours, Pointe du Hoc became the scene of a desperate last stand. The Germans launched furious counterattacks throughout the night. The Rangers fought in dark tunnels, inside bomb craters, and in the ruins of the bunkers. With no food, rationed water, and ammunition running out, they began using the Mauser rifles and MP-40 submachine guns of the dead Germans. Colonel Rudder was hit twice, but refused to be treated while his men were still dying. The short-range radio barely worked, and the only message they managed to send was short and grim: ammunition low, food exhausted, Rangers holding ground. The price of tomorrow. When Allied troops finally managed to break through the German lines and reach Pointe du Hoc on June 8th, the sight was one of horror. The promontory was covered in bodies, debris, and the smell of death. Of the 225 Rangers who had set out on that suicide mission, only 90 were still capable of fighting. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing. But those 90 men had ensured that not a single 155mm shell was fired at the beaches. They saved thousands of lives at the cost of their own youth. Today, if you visit Pointe du Hoc, the silence is profound. The wind blows through the craters that were never filled, serving as permanent scars on the French earth. It is a place that reminds us that freedom was not won with speeches, but with the bloodied hands of young men who climbed a wall of death because the world needed them to do so. They were the Rangers, and for them, the impossible was just the beginning of a day's work.